What's going on, everybody? This is a solo edition of the Baseball Insiders. Adam Weinrib, still on vacation. That bum did not invite me. Very unfortunate, but we're going to make do. We had John Heyman on the episode last week. Now it's myself answering plenty of trade deadline questions, doing all sorts of different stuff. Canyon, hello. Michael, hello. Ryan, hello. Jacob is sound asleep. I miss Adam, too. It's weird doing the show without him. But we're going to make do. We got plenty of questions that were provided from the Discord. We'll be answering plenty of questions that are provided in the chat here as well. Justin Paul Skenes is not going to get traded. So, I mean, you can already, although I appreciate you being consistent with asking that question. It feels like you ask that every show for like the last 4 or 5 episodes. So I appreciate you for asking that, but he's going nowhere. Although he did ask a good question here about how do the Dodgers replace Mookie Betts and Yamamoto. Like, the good news for them is, like, it's not season-ending injuries. They're going to end up being able to navigate this. They got plenty of talent throughout the roster. I did think the rotation was already something they were going to end up addressing at the deadline. I think that makes it even more likely. But the fact that they're going to be back for October, I think, is going to end up being a really good thing. An important thing for the Dodgers, and they should be able to withstand it. So I think they're going to end up being fine there. But I still think they're going to be plenty aggressive at the deadline as well. Their offseason kind of underscored that, laid the groundwork for it, but we'll see how much money they have. We'll see how much money they have to add to the payroll at the deadline here. But I will start with a Discord question here because we have plenty of them. We got lots of time here. So let's get into it. What team has surprised me the most this season? I would say, like, I'll give 2 answers to this because coming into the year, I ended up listing the New York Yankees as a team that I thought had a legitimate chance of missing the postseason, and then Brian Cashman's job would end up being in question. And in reality, they're one of the best teams in the majors. They have questions on that roster for sure, especially in the infield, first and third base. We'll see exactly how they're going to end up addressing it at the deadline. I'll get into that here shortly. But they have exceeded my wildest expectations. They've exceeded many expectations here as well. I think they're going to end up being a team that is aggressive at the deadline. They realize that this is a prime opportunity for them to make a deep postseason run, especially with Juan Soto on the roster for the rest of the year before he reaches free agency. I think they're going to end up adding at least 1 or 2 bullpen pieces and then trying to figure out what they're going to do at first and third bases. And they have John Birdie, who's going to be coming back from injury. They also got DJ LeMahieu coming back. So, I mean, they got options, but it remains to be seen exactly what position they add between first and third bases. But I expect them to add there. They need another bat in that lineup. I think that's become pretty clear here. But the Yankees, I expect them to be plenty aggressive, but they have surprised me. They've surprised many people in baseball, and I think they have a prime opportunity here to really kind of take hold of the American League, especially, although that being said, the Orioles are pretty good in that division as well. But you look at it too, to kind of switch gears here for a second, the Chicago Cubs, to me, are I call them one of the most surprising teams in baseball for how bad they've been. They re-signed Bellinger in the offseason. They signed Dansby Swanson a couple of years ago. They added some pieces to that roster. Also signed Craig Counsell, the biggest deal for a manager in baseball history, and yet they're in last place in that division. I don't think anybody in their right mind could have expected the Cubs to be in last place at this point of the year, but that's the reality. We'll see exactly what they do and how they go about the deadline. Like, if they do add, the bullpen has to be a priority because it's just been a disaster, especially in the 9th inning. It's been everything that they could have. Like, it's been basically a worst nightmare for the Cubs, and we'll see exactly how they go about the deadline. But if their struggles continue and they miss the postseason and finish the season under 500, Craig Counsell is going to be fine. Like, I mean, I think that's pretty clear. I think they'd have to ask some serious questions about Jed Hoyer. I don't know if they do it, but I think their struggles this year like warrant that conversation starting to be had. To switch gears, let's go to the next question here. Does Paul Skenes, does he make the All-Star game? Honestly, I think he should be. I mean, we've seen what he's done in early, ever since he's been called up. He's been probably the most electric young starting pitcher in baseball. I mean, him and Jared Jones make an elite combo, and that kind of really kind of complicates the trade deadline equation for the Pirates here. Do they buy when they have those the two starting pitchers who could be a real problem come like postseason time, or how aggressively? Because I don't think they're going to end up being I don't think they're going to end up being sellers. At least as of this point, I think they could end up looking to add another bat. I know they've been poking around with some certain bats, but as far as Skenes go, like I think he should be. Do I think he makes it? My guess is probably not, just considering he hasn't spent that much time in the majors. But that being said, like the All-Star game is for entertainment purposes. Skenes has been awesome this year. He's electric. Seeing him go against the American League's best, or just baseball's best in general, I think that would be a really cool thing. So like, I think he should, but I'm just kind of skeptical that he ultimately will. Next question here is, are there any teams that could become surprise sellers? And do I have any surprise trade prediction or something on a left field? Like, I guess this kind of answers one of the questions in here that from Andres Flores is, do the Rangers buy or sell? Like, if you look at it right now, they are a team who they're 9 games back in that division. It kind of complicates things because, they have a lot of these players that are coming back, like Scherzer, DeGrom, some players on offense as well who are going to be coming off the injury list. Like, I think that's got to be in the equation. And they can easily come back because we've seen the Mariners. They've been, this year they've been really good, but in years past they've been up and down. And one rough stretch and one hot stretch from the Rangers can really end up getting them back in the hunt for the division. So my guess is they probably either stand pat or like soft buy, but we're still 6 weeks away from the trade deadline. I think that's going to end up being something that certainly bears watching, especially with Chris Young, his future being uncertain with his contract up at the end of the year. I still fully expect him to end up being extended, but I think he'll want to be in a position where he buys, especially having Bruce Bochy as the manager. Like, they're going to want to maximize the window of having him. So my guess is the Rangers probably don't sell. I think the other team here where the conversation, it's possible, is the Cubs, but we'll see. Like, it's so early still with trade deadline talk. Obviously, we're 6 weeks away. There's only a few teams that really kind of stand out as obvious sellers. So I think, I just wouldn't. I don't think we're gonna have any clear answers until probably like mid to late July. So let's go on to the next one here. Who are some untouchables for the known sellers like the Athletics, Rockies, Marlins, White Sox, and Angels? That is a very good question. The only player I think who is untouchable for the Rockies is Ryan McMahon. I think everyone else is going to end up being fair game. And like McMahon, he's someone that has drawn interest from the Rockies, but there's been no indication whatsoever that they've been willing to even listen on him. I don't think anyone else in that roster though is untouchable. So we'll see. They got some pieces in that rotation that can end up attracting interest, which is kind of surprising for the Rockies because you wouldn't think starting pitching for them would end up being a strength. But they do have some pieces that I think would be attractive to teams. And Michael asked, would the Rockies trade Tovar? Like, no, I don't think so. That they just extended him. They got him at a pretty team-friendly rate. So I don't think that'd be something that they would entertain. As far as some of these other teams, the Marlins, I think the only untouchables for them would be guys like Yuri Perez. That's also a valid point by Paul here. Brian is untouchable because no one will touch him. Like, that contract is about as untradeable as it gets. He's not going anywhere, obviously. But the Marlins, I don't think they trade either Yuri Perez or Sandy Alcantara. Both of them are hurt, and they'd be selling low on Alcantara, so I don't think that's going to be something they necessarily entertain. But anyone else on that roster, I think, is certainly going to be fair game. Jesus Luzardo makes sense for so many of these contending teams. You look at it I think the Brewers are like a sneaky team that can make plenty of sense there. Padres too, but I don't necessarily know if that's something that they'd be interested in. But I do know that they've had conversations, or the Padres, I should say, have had conversations with the Marlins about, or not the Marlins, but they've had conversations with the White Sox about Garrett Crochet, I should say. So, I mean, they've been poking around. The Padres, we'll get into that in a little bit, but they've been looking around for some starting pitching. As far as the White Sox and the A's go, I would say everyone on those rosters are, I wouldn't say available, but like they won't hang up the phone. Like the White Sox, they're in position to be the most aggressive and strongest seller and really capitalize on what's going to end up being a seller's market. As far as the A's go, like they've obviously, like they're clearly listening on Mason Miller. I don't think their asking price is just absurd. So I wouldn't necessarily say a trade for Mason Miller is likely, but the fact that they're willing to listen on Miller would seem to indicate they'd be willing to listen on anyone. And that's never a bad thing. I mean, that's what good teams do. It's what all teams do, or should do at least. And it never hurts to see what's out there, because if you're blown away with an offer, you should take it, especially if you're going to end up getting max value. But I think the A's can end up being in a position where they have good pieces. Lucas Urseg, who is a friend of the program here, who's gotten plenty of mentions, is going to end up being is going to be a player who I think is going to draw pretty decent interest at the deadline here. There's plenty of other guys on that roster, so I don't think necessarily anyone on that A's roster is untouchable. And then the other one that was asked is the Los Angeles Angels. And for me, they're a team that I think almost everyone on that roster, besides young controllable players, will probably be fair game. I know players such as like a Taylor Ward or a Joe Adell have drawn interest. There is nothing, at least as of last night, from when I last checked, there was nothing imminent there, but there's interest. The asking prices, though, are very high, and I would fully anticipate prices for many of these players coming down around mid to late July, probably as soon as probably about mid-July is when those prices are going to become more realistic, because I ended up asking an executive who is pretty high ranking in the front office, like what the trade market looks like right now. And I quote, he said, "It's a joke." So that's currently where it stands right now. Not much clarity. Asking prices are very high. So we'll see, but I wouldn't expect any action in the I wouldn't expect much action. Maybe like a surprise trade happens, but we'll see. But I wouldn't get your hopes up for anything too extensive here. And now we've reached the point of the episode where I have to tell you about DraftKings, because DraftKings is offering a fantastic sign-up bonus for new users. There are new customers who can place a $5 first bet on any sport to instantly claim $150 in bonus bets when you sign up with the code Baseball Insider. The best part is you will receive the rewards if your first bet loses. Using our code Baseball Insider not only supports the podcast, but it also gets you these bonuses. And if you've been considering signing up for DraftKings, make sure to use the promo code Baseball Insider to maximize your first bet. The offer is available to people who are 21 years or older, and also in gambling, or where states where gambling is allowed. Please remember to gamble responsibly. Check the episode description for more details about that offer. It would be greatly appreciated, because that would support me, put food on my table. So we appreciate you for tuning into the Baseball Insiders. And now we're going to get to the second part of the program here, where we are going to be talking about a question from Drew, wondering if there's any Padres news. And I can tell you, AJ Preller is not sound asleep. He is out there looking for he's out there looking for starting pitching, and he's also looking for a late inning reliever. He has been aggressive on the phones, I can confidently say that, but with the asking prices being where they are, I wouldn't necessarily think that a deal is going to happen anytime soon. Obviously, that can change with one phone call. We've seen that happen before on this show, where I've said the Pirates weren't close to anything, and then 2 hours later they signed Aroldis Chapman. It could just happen that quickly. But as of this point, he has been probably one of, if not the most aggressive executives on the trade market. But I don't think there's going to be anything relatively close, at least as of this point. But pitching is clearly a priority. But JT Royals asked a question here about the Royals. I want to answer one from the chat here. What could the Royals do? I think one of the areas that they're really going to end up prioritizing here is going to be the late inning reliever market. And we saw a report from Ken Rosenthal before the season that they ended up inquiring about Devin Williams of the Brewers. So I think that's going to be in kind of the area where they try to really address things. And I think a player who certainly bears watching is Jason Adam of the Rays. He is someone who was actually drafted by JJ Picollo, the Royals' general manager. And I mean, if they drafted him, he's clearly knows them. He's controllable. He's cheap. I think that's one that makes a lot of sense for the Royals. Could be something to watch there. But I think he's going to be one of many names that they consider even ultimately check in. And so we'll see. Will Thomas asked, what are the Braves going to do with Harris down too? That complicates things even more. I mean, having him down along with Ronald Acuna Jr., I think that's a clear area of need for the Braves. We've seen Alex Anthopoulos be aggressive on the trade market. He has had conversations with other teams. So we'll see. But I ultimately expect the Braves. I don't think they have any other choice. I think they have to add an outfielder at some point, and I would expect Alex Anthopoulos to do so. Will Red Sox ownership let Craig Breslow add? We'll see. Red Sox ownership is very what's the word I'm looking for? Unpredictable there as far as what they're willing to let that front office do. But currently they are 38 and 35. They have exceeded expectations. I think they should at least consider it, but they also have some players on that roster who, like, let's say they trade a Kenley Jensen type, which frees up some room on the payroll. If they trade Jensen, does that allow them to add payroll to the other parts? I mean, you would certainly think so. But I think Jensen is a realistic trade candidate. So we'll see there, but I'm hopeful, at least from for a Red Sox fan perspective, I hope that ownership allows them to add to the payroll, because the fact that that's even a question is pretty sad for a historic and storied franchise like the Boston Red Sox here. To get back to the Discord questions, let's see. Do I think Detroit sells? This is a really interesting question here, because they started off really well and they've kind of come back down to earth. They're under 500 right now. They're 11 and a half games back in the division, and they're 6 games back in the wild card. So it's like, as far as a wild card perspective, it's doable for sure. But if you look at it, if they continue to fall back, and they're struggling right now, if they continue to fall back and fall to a place where it makes it really tough to come back, they could end up having one of the best pieces on the trade market as far as a rotation piece in Jack Flaherty. He's been really, really good for them this year as a one-year signing. And I think that could end up being a player who could get a similar return, probably a little bit more to what they got last year for Michael Lorenzen. It's the same kind of situation where they end up taking a one-year flyer on a guy, and it's really worked out for Flaherty. He's got an ERA that's hovering around 3. There figures to be plenty of teams interested in him. So I think that's certainly one that can make sense. Another guy, I think Mark Canha makes plenty. He could end up improving a lot of different lineups around the league. They also have a Gio Urshela. They have Carson Kelly. I mean, Kelly's more of an underrated or under the radar kind of guy who won't attract headlines, but teams are always looking for catching help. So I think that could be something that at least he could draw interest and be a guy who ends up being traded in if they end up ultimately selling. But I don't think we're at a point right quite yet where the Tigers even know if they're going to be in position to buy or sell. So I think it's going to be TBD, but they have trade pieces that could really entice some of these teams. What are the Cubs going to do was another one. We kind of talked about that a little bit ago. They don't even know the answer to this yet. But I think bullpen is a pretty clear need. They also need some more offense because that offense has been dreadful. I do think, actually, I know one name to watch as far as a potential addition for the Cubs could be a guy like Tomas Nido. Nothing is close or done there, but they're one of the teams that's interested in Tomas Nido. So we'll see what ultimately happens there, but that's at least one of the things that they're considering. I think what John just said from the Phillies about the Phillies here, that Jim Salisbury, who is as plugged in about the Phillies as anyone, and then Ruben Amaro, that they believe the Phillies add a starting outfielder and a fourth outfielder. Luis Robert makes so much sense there. I know that's been speculated about plenty, but if they want to add a big name outfielder, that's something that they could absolutely do. They have the prospect capital to make it happen. So, I mean, we'll see. To close it out here, let's see what changes as far as the Angels go. Like, what do they actually sell pieces like a Taylor Ward or a Luis Rengifo? Rengifo has had the best year of his career. So, I mean, he's certainly a guy who is going to attract plenty of trade interest. There's teams out there that I believe have checked in. Taylor Ward has gotten interest as well. I think the Angels are going to be open to it, but we've seen in the past, Artie Moreno's been really hesitant to sell these the controllable pieces where it's clear that they're selling and going to end up going into a rebuild, because rebuilding is just not something that the Angels or Artie Moreno just in general does not want to do. So I'm kind of in wait and see mode on whether or not he ultimately does that. But they have trade pieces. I mean, we mentioned before Taylor Ward and Joe Adell. I mean, they have like Luis Rengifo. If you look at his production this year, he's controllable as well. I think he certainly warrants at least like a strong consideration to be traded, because I think this is probably the most value he's going to have, or that he has had at least to this point. Then you look at Tyler Anderson, who's still got a year left to control on his contract at $13 million. You have Matt Moore. You have a bunch of controllable relievers. I mean, they can be in position where they're not going to be like the team that gets like the big headline prospects in return, but they can end up getting some useful players to make their farm system better. Because we saw what happened last year after acquiring Lucas Giolito and Ronaldo Lopez and some others. They gutted their farm system and then ultimately put those players on waivers a month and a half later and gave them up for nothing. So that really hurt. So it hurt their farm system in a big way and really set them back. But that's currently where they're at. So we'll see. But I'm kind of in wait and see mode to see if Artie Moreno ultimately puts the green light on selling, at least, or not selling, but like rebuilding. They're kind of at that point now, but selling guys like Taylor Ward and some of these other controllable players would really signal that they're in rebuild mode. So we'll see. But I do appreciate everyone who has tuned in to this episode of the Baseball Insiders, my first ever show that has been by myself. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully I didn't make too much of a fool of myself, because the next episode, which will be next week, will actually feature Adam Weinrib again, because he will be back from vacation. We will welcome him back with open arms because he is missed. Adam, I appreciate you. Everyone who tuned into the show, I appreciate you. Hopefully have some news to report here, and who knows, not too long. We'll see. But I appreciate everyone, and I will see you next week. Take care, everybody.